Well, here I am inside of St James's Park on a relatively cold January afternoon evening, and behind me you can see PSV Eindhoven training ahead of their match here at St James's Park against Newcastle United in what is the penultimate round of matches in this season's Champions League phase. Now, Newcastle are very, very close to securing a place in at least the playoff knockout round stage of this competition. A win against PSV would indeed guarantee that. In fact, a draw would probably all but guarantee that. I think there's a bit of goal difference working out to do on that regard, but if they win, they're pretty much into the next stage of the Champions League. We are in Newcastle United's press box, which of course is just above the tunnel and dugout area at the pitch at St James's Park. It's actually quite low down. Some press boxes you go into are right up at the top of stands, and you get perhaps more of a bird's eye view, whereas in St James's Park at least you get much more close down, which it has its benefit. It also has its downside. Sometimes you like to have a better reading of the game, which you can't always get from this point of view, I often think. But certainly you're a bit closer to the action. You can hear up close and personal, what the players are saying, what the managers are saying, which that can be a good thing as well. Now, where do Newcastle stand going into this game? Well, let's be honest, Sunday against Wolves was a dismal encounter. I put in my match report for North East Football TV just how poor that game was, and Newcastle just aren't really adapted well enough, and they don't have the right personnel to break down sides who sit deep against them. We saw this against Manchester United, for example. Even Sunderland, to an extent, to be honest. The Stadium of Light was a similar sort of game, and then this game against Wolves as well. You could argue, well, other sides like Burnley, who they have actually beaten away from home this season. Well, actually, Burnley, they came at Newcastle and had a go, and actually that was more to Newcastle's advantage, because then Newcastle, even though they weren't great that night at Turf Moor, well, they did win the game 3-1, and they scored because Burnley left them spaces. Newcastle like that. They're a team of athletes, a team of runners who can exploit spaces really well when they're given the chance to, but when you're asked them to attack a team who are just sitting in, that's when they're a bit flummoxed, and so it proved to be once again at Molineux. Now, to turn around once again, of course, you'll have PSV there. I can't imagine they'll do that. Now, they're doing really well in the Dutch league, of course. They are top and doing fantastically well on their way to presumably another Dutch championship. So you'd think with that, and the fact that they beat Liverpool 4-1 at Anfield earlier on in this Champions League campaign, you'd imagine that they actually want to come and have a go. And also, if you look at the Champions League phase table, PSV have, as their player and manager just put inside of the press conference, a 70% chance, they'd say, of getting through to the league phase, getting out of the league phase and into the playoff round. And, well, they're on 8 points at the moment. 9 could be enough. So a draw here would probably do them the world of good. So you could argue, well, they might settle for that and sit in, but actually, to be honest, given the confidence they would have got from beating Liverpool at Anfield, I can't imagine that they'll want to just sit in and accept a draw. I think they'll come here and try, because why wouldn't you? But of course, that might play into Newcastle's hands a bit more. And of course, Newcastle certainly do have a point to prove after their dismal display against Wolves at Molineux in the Premier League at the weekend. So they're the main talking points. I think Newcastle need to respond from the performance against Wolves. But as I asked Eddie Howe, are there some reasons to be positive? And he said yes, he's a glass half full sort of a man, because Newcastle are indeed, sorry, I was just being told that we've got to leave in 2 minutes from training, but Newcastle, from watching the training here, Newcastle are, let's be honest, they're only a couple of points away from the top 5 in the Premier League, and they're still in Europe, on the verge of getting through, and of course they are still in the domestic cups as well. As I was saying there before I ended up having to leave the PSV training session, I'm now just next to the media entrance here at St James's Park, was that Newcastle United, despite the inconsistency, despite even me giving them a bit of a kicking after Wolves, they are still actually in a really good position. And Eddie Howe, as he said, is a glass half full man, and the season could still really have a very positive ending. Top 5 could once again get Champions League, and that's very much in their grasp. As I said, domestic cups, Okay, the Carabao Cup, getting to the final, that's looking a bit of a mountain to climb at the Etihad, but of course they've still got an FA Cup fourth round game away at Villa Park. That in itself is tricky, but there's still a possibility that they could make it through to the fifth round, and then suddenly, they're not far from Wembley once again. And then after that, well, you've got the Champions League. Now, they're not going to get to the final, obviously, but they could easily make, as I say, they'll get into the playoff round, but they could easily make a last 16 or even a quarter-final, and that would be great for their self-belief, for revenue as well. So there are things to be positive about, and if anything, they're doing all this, they're not really playing that well. Even when they've won games convincingly this season, which hasn't happened too often, they still haven't been at their brilliant best. And so the one thing I'd say is best to take away from Newcastle at the moment, despite the frustration, despite the inconsistency, is that if Newcastle do suddenly start stringing some performances and results together, yes, they'd just won 3 in a row in the league before the Wolves game, they could end the season really well. And that's the positivity that Eddie Howe will certainly be holding on to, I think. And so with that, thank you all very much for watching this little walk and talk vlog thoughts ahead of Newcastle against PSV in the Champions League. We'll be back soon to discuss more footballing matters from the North East. But until then, thank you all very much for watching. We'll see you next time.